I will march along this path of ambitious, forceful tides. I'll be dead before it crashes down before my eyes.
So, and welcome to another episode of Rebel City Podcast. This will be episode 112. This week, after the back of one of the shots that we did in the last couple of weeks, which Matt really put together about gaming, we've got Joe Donnelly. How's it going, Joe?
Not bad. How are you?
Hi, great, mate. It's nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in.
Struggling with this weather. I'm not going to lie. See, try to get fucking sleep. Like, absolutely brutal. Like me and Matt were saying when we came in, both of us were like, oh man, fried.
Oh no.
That's fucking
It's actually cold
weather.
today at 15 degrees or something.
I know.
It's bizarre.
I would never ever complain about the sunshine, but definitely at night when you're trying to sleep, it's an absolute nightmare. But it's a pleasure to meet you, mate. We were just chatting there off mic that you're, you know, a Celtic biographer. Must be an interesting job for you, especially right now with the, you know, seems to be that half the fans are raging at the club and other fans are starting to get excited about like the future. But
No, I work for the club. The obviously a disappointing season for Celtic standards last year, but plenty of excitement just now. Obviously, get the new manager in the building.
I like what I mean. I've been in both camps over the course of the summer, where I've been both unhappy and excited. But I liked what he had to say for himself in the press conferences, and if he can deliver half of what he thinks he's capable, I think we're in for.
Yeah. I think he said
hopefully
himself,
a
he'll
good
be
couple of years.
judged on the pitch, which is a great attitude to begin in with, because that's what it is. I mean, we're at a point just now where it's exciting, and obviously there's, you know, a lot to come, and
Definitely.
that will come. So.
So as Paul was saying, we obviously had recently spoke sort of briefly about gaming, just because as I was saying to you off mic, like, I read an article sort of turn of the year, and it was describing, you know, how people had started to find benefits to gaming in terms of managing their mental health, and I had a bit of a kind of like moment of realisation where through the pandemic I kind of was like, oh shit, that's like, without meaning to, I've kind of been managing myself through sort of gaming. And when we were talking, it was quite unusual to see gaming framed in, you know, a more positive light than would normally be the case. A lot of what you get is, you know, uber violence and, you know, moral panic, and, you know, it's been the case since, you know, we go back to like Wolfenstein and Doom, where people are like, oh my god, this is like super violent, and then when you look at them now and where games have went, it's, you know, really, really tame a lot of the time. So it was quite nice to see this, and because it is a like multi-billion pound industry worldwide, you know what I mean? Like, so we consume the content in the same way that we do movies now, I think, in a lot of senses, and it's certainly part of what I enjoy about gaming is the sort of narratives. Euro checkpoint on sort of your own experiences with gaming and sort of mental health.
So I suppose it makes sense to kind of tell my story. I've always played video games my entire life. The first game which I can attribute to the first which I picked up was Lemons on the Atari ST.
Right.
Made by DMA Design, a developer based in Dundee, who later moved to Edinburgh and renamed himself as Rockstar North, which people know as the Grand Theft Auto developers. I have always played video games all through my school years as a means of sort of what you touched upon there in terms of what people have been doing in the pandemic. Escapism, again, at school, not really from anything too harsh, you know, just even just fed up with school and wanted to spend a bit of time in different worlds from my end. In 2008, when I left school, I became a plumber and gas fitter, so that's what I was doing full time in 2008. My uncle sadly took his own life. And at the time when I was feeling a lot of stress, you know, reality wasn't the best place at that point for my family and myself. I used games as a means of escapism. I really stepped that up. I was throwing myself into the games which I enjoyed at the time. And yeah, I mean, obviously kind of going through the grieving process and stuff, but it was great to be able to switch off and just run into BioShock and fight some of the baddies there for a few hours and just kind of lose myself. And in 2009, a year after my uncle passed, my girlfriend and I went to Australia for a couple of years and did the kind of backpacking thing and settled in Melbourne and did a bit of work there. And then when I was away, I decided that I wanted to leave behind plumbing and labour and stuff like that and pursue a career change. I'd always quite enjoyed writing, so I started studying journalism. And when I was studying, I started to kind of fold in my interest with video games. I'd always read the magazines when I was younger.
Yep.
And then started pursuing some work. Once I left university, I was writing kind of full-time freelance and trying to fold in games which were tackling themes of mental health, which I discovered along the way. And like you kind of mentioned about the kind of tabloid press about how video games can make you violent, or when people think about video games they maybe think of Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, Fortnite, FIFA. I discovered this whole array of kind of indie games which was tackling themes of suicide, depression, OCD, autism, all this wide spectrum of kind of interpersonal themes which I didn't realise existed myself, and I knew that a lot of people didn't from the outside looking in. And I found that when I was trying to understand the depression, anxiety, which I started to get in the wake of my uncle's suicide before I spoke to a doctor, because as we know in West of Scotland particularly, up and down the country, all over the world, men aren't very good at that, but particularly here in Glasgow, I was discovering games that were actually specifically about suicide or depression, and they were making me think about what I had in my head that I wasn't necessarily able to articulate. And I think the key thing for me was that I knew what depression was, because everybody, I mean, there's a lot more of a conversation now, which is great. It's still a long ways to go.
Aye.
But I'd heard about it. Clearly, I'd understood that my uncle would have had it in some form. But hearing about it and understanding what you're feeling were two different things, and I hadn't really realised that. So these games helped me kind of understand what was happening. I was able to seek professional help, go on medication, get a diagnosis of depression and anxiety disorder. And again, when I was writing about video games, I was trying to write about these games when I could. I had a column with Vice on video games and mental health. And then at one point they restructured financially. I moved away from video games journalism, as I say, I'm working in football journalism now, and always felt I had more to say. And in 2019, I approached 404 Inc., an independent publisher based in Edinburgh, who are brilliant. Anyone who's heard of Chris McQueer?
We've had Chris McQueer on the podcast before.
He's had a couple of books with them as well. And it was actually him, in many ways, that inspired me to approach 404, because the kind of people that they represent, kind of maybe working class or underrepresented voices, they do a really good job with them. And I approached them with the idea of Checkpoint, which was essentially what I'd been doing, writing about games and mental health, but with more to say. And as we said before we started recording, I spoke to a wide array of professionals, of video game players, of enthusiasts, of mental health professionals, and kind of fed in my own narrative in terms of the kind of personal lived experience with suicide that I had. And the response has been really good. I've had a lot of kind of private messages, emails, invitations for people like yourself to come on and kind of chat about it. And it's even one of the stories which I always tell in terms of going back to the kind of the reservation about sharing your feelings, which we have in Glasgow, is that when I started writing about games and mental health, I had some of my pals kind of message me on WhatsApp or private on Twitter or whatever, and saying, "Oh, I read this article you wrote about Grand Theft Auto and mental health and how he helped you with a certain part of getting over your uncle," kind of thing. I've actually been taking medication for the last 6 months, and these are boys that have been playing football with every Wednesday or in the pub every Saturday, and they never cracked a light. Now, in an ideal world, we'd be able to have the conversation face to face. We could have it in the pub or a pint, but maybe not there yet in terms of my group and maybe as a society as well. But the fact that they felt able to private message me, I think is a great step in the right direction.
I think that's a really common thing we experience with not just ourselves, but a lot of the people we speak to, is that the point at which you start discussing this actually encourages others to take part in that conversation.
Yeah, and I think breaking down those stigmas, which are, I mean, I'm not saying it's exclusively fueled by the tabloids, but if you're always peddling the fact that there's a school shooting in America and the fact that they played Call of Duty all day, I think they might have played Call of Duty all day, but I think if you think it's okay to pick up a gun and go to school, there are other issues at play.
Definitely.
Whatever the motives are there, I'll never understand. But I don't think that video games, I mean, they might have played a part, but I don't think you can blame it exclusively on the medium.
Absolutely not.
So that was the kind of my story and why I wrote Checkpoint. And it was, I mean, it's been a great experience to still come and be able to talk about mental health through the lens of video games, because so many people are playing video games nowadays. I mean, you mentioned about the pandemic, and at a time when, without sounding overly cheesy, but at a time when we couldn't explore the real world, here were all these worlds that you could explore for your couch.
I think that's exactly one of the things that, I mean, the Rockstar games traditionally have never been something that appeal to me. I've tried them over the years, and I've always felt there's a wee bit too much going on in them, particularly in GTA and stuff like that, where you're driving cars while shooting and all sorts of, and it was just, I was never very good at them, sort of thing. And I feel almost like I kind of graduated this year to like becoming a sort of proper gamer, and playing sort of Red Dead Redemption, and that is just a absolutely gigantic open world where there's so much, and that's exactly what I did when I kind of encountered that game. Was I just disappeared into this world, and I mean I was obsessed for weeks. I was pretty much like convincing myself that I was a fucking cowboy in real life, you know what I mean? Like, but I can definitely relate to what you're talking about there, where it's about going out and exploring these other worlds. Like, I'm big on, you know, Tomb Raider and these types of things where, you know, you're actually rewarded for, you know, the exploration of the worlds that it actually gets involved in, and there is the escapism of that is actually really quite sort of engrossing.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
I think it's interesting over the course of the pandemic as well. And speaking personally, and I've spoken to a few people who have kind of felt similar. At the very start, when everything was closed off and people were doing the kind of Zoom quizzes with their families and all the weird stuff which people were doing at the very beginning, I was playing more games like I got Animal Crossing for the Nintendo Switch. I was playing GTA Online. That's one which I really enjoy. Dip in and out of Minecraft from time to time, and it's in these social spaces where all the rules had suddenly changed in the real world, but and this will be relevant to kind of younger players as well, who may have been used to. I've got 2 wins now, so I'm spending a lot of time in the house anyway, even before all this. But the rules had changed so much for everybody. But maybe if you're at school or you can't go and play football or whatever, but the rules in these games, in Fortnite and Minecraft and things like that, they stayed the same. You know, it's a very familiar world for people, and it was comforting to be able to do that. As time went on, and as much as, you know, I love my family, but you're kind of on top of each other over the last year, watch what I'm saying. But I found in the kind of last few months, probably this side of the year in lockdown, that I was diving into games which were single player because I just wanted to be myself. In that sense, that you kind of touched upon in that area of achievement, I was playing games like Demon Souls and Dark Souls, which are, for them that's not aware, kind of gothic fantasy RPG games, which are known for being really difficult. And the sense of achievement of me just playing against the computer and beating one of the bosses, you know, spending hours at a time getting killed and eventually overcoming it, just that kind of level of solitude that I was getting for a couple of hours. So it's funny, it went from, you know, wanting to jump into these online worlds to keep everything the same to just getting a wee corner to myself at a time when we were forced all these.
I've never played the Dark Souls, but I did spend quite a considerable period of time playing and replaying Jedi Fallen Order, which I believe the game engine is sort of very similar, where there's a lot of sort of parry, thrust, like sword fighting, and like, again, this is part of the graduation that I was talking about, where that's a level of complexity and like, and you know, intricacy on gaming that I was just never had the patience for. Is very much like point and shoot Call of Duty, and that type of thing. So that level of achievement is something that, again, I can also relate to. Like, it's quite weird to, you know, have these realizations and then be like, oh Christ, other people are having them as well. You know what I mean? Like,
I had a different experience personally. Like, and first of all, like, I get really sort of scared about getting into Call of Duty during the pandemic, because I was thinking to myself, oh, like, these things cause like weird things to go on in your brain, and you know, like, am I going to end up like really violent, like you're saying? And then you play it for a few weeks and you realise, oh no, that's just a whole load of shit, really. But I would, you know, the sense of achievement, like, I'm terrible at Call of Duty. I don't know anybody that's actually any good at it, by the way. I don't believe that there's anybody that exists that's any good at it, other than probably people on Twitch or whatever. But what I got for it really during the pandemic, I got into it through a mate who's constantly playing it. He gets home from work and he's on it, and then all day weekends, was feeling like I had my mates there. Like, I really, like, I wasn't thinking, oh, I really can't wait to get home and play COD, or I can't wait to turn the PlayStation on to play COD. It was the banter, really, and just like this sort of feeling that, like you're saying, like, oh, this is normal, this is like hanging about with my mates. And then I actually made mates, like these guys that from his work. So it's like a group of us now, that sort of group chat. And during the pandemic, I really got a feeling as sort of being part of something, when everything was just sort of like you're saying, there was just nothing to feel part of. So I don't think it just works on like one level for people. Like, I think absolutely there'll be a sense of achievement and
definitely,
you know, like dopamine, like when you're playing like Animal Crossing and stuff. But I really felt like I was part of something, and that I had friends and I could speak to people. Do you know what I mean? And
I mean, because there's so much of the kind of our social lives that were compromised over the last year, where, you know, you weren't able to. And on a Friday night, if the pubs are shut or wherever people go, cinema, whatever, and if you're able to jump onto a server and get a game, I think it's interesting. Like, I wrote Checkpoint before the pandemic. It was supposed to be published in May, and it got pushed back as a result till July. So in that time, I wrote a wee kind of prelude chapter just explaining this and saying that at a time when, and of course, everybody realised the significance by July by the time it came out, but I don't know that we knew it was going to last quite as long. And
definitely not.
I hope that we're getting towards the end of the woods, but you never know, it could end up getting backwards as well, as we've seen. But I think it's interesting because at the very start I was doing a lot of kind of press things like this, just saying, you know, video games will offer this, you know, place where you can go and socialise with your pals, or, you know, escapism or sense of achievement. But as times went on, and I do have a chapter in Checkpoint which discusses the potential for a video game addiction.
Yep.
And year before last, the World Health Organisation acknowledged that gaming addiction is a thing.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of pushback from experts who say it's been a snap judgment. There's not enough research and evidence to suggest either way, to be fair. There are a lot of people who reckon they've been addicted to video games in the past. Things have suffered relationships. Maybe they've been at university and they've been failing, or their work or whatever. And it's interesting because when you combine the tabloids with somebody like the World Health Organisation weighing in, someone from the outside looking in would think, oh shit, video games are terrible again.
Yeah.
And I think it's a balance. Personally, I think that like anything, video games should be enjoyed in moderation. You know, nothing should suffer. And I know it's not that easy for some people. I've been asked before, do I believe in video game addiction? It's hard to say because it's not as obvious as alcoholism or drug addiction, but I don't think it's fair to rule out any form of addiction, especially in somewhere like Glasgow where there is a lot of addiction in various forms. But I think you need to be careful of how much you're playing video games, and that feeds into, whilst at the start of the pandemic I was saying people should be playing video games, really ringing the bell for them. I'm still doing that as a video game enthusiast, but after a year of changed routines, like you're saying, maybe you're playing COD with your mates, which is great, but if some people had been furloughed the full time and they're playing all day, those routines can become habit. And I think you need to be mindful of that. And as people start to get reassimilated back into the workplace, maybe they're splitting remote time and they're also getting in. If you're at work, you know, like that needs to take priority over your gaming habits, and you need to be mindful.
Yeah. Do you know Bobby Lee? You ever heard of Bobby Lee?
Yeah, the name.
So he's like an American comedian. And I don't know why this just came to my mind, but I was watching him on a podcast and he went and shot a movie. So he's got a massive podcast called Tiger Belly, and in the studio in the background, these gaming setups there, and they'll do ads at the end of the podcast and he's sitting playing. So as soon as they wrap, he's like, COD. And what he said was when he took the PlayStation into the hotel room, he was like, it just wasn't the same. And it was like, the setting's different, so then he was like, this is different, and it sort of broke. He's like, I've went back to playing Minecraft. He's like, I've stopped playing COD. And I think when he said that, I was like, he must have been addicted to that, because it's more about the routine that he's doing rather than him enjoying the game. Because when he was talking about it, he was like, I realised when I was playing it in this hotel room, I don't even enjoy this. I'm not even liking what's going on here. I don't like this game. Went back to Minecraft and was like, oh, this is really soothing instead of feeling anxious and whatever. And I think like when you notice wee things like that, you should take a step back. And it just came up there. I was thinking, he changed his setting where he was playing his game and he was like, this isn't the same for me. So there must be something addictive about
and
what
that's
he's
the thing,
doing, you know?
Good on him for being able to identify that. I don't think it's
you get
always
lucky,
easy.
you know?
That's it. I don't think it's always the easiest thing to do. And I think that's where, again, I mean, my oldest daughter's only nearly 3, so she's only kind of messing about with Sonic Mania and bashing the buttons and that kind of stuff. She's already better than me. But
it's always the way, man.
I know. It's only a kind of glimpse into the future as well.
Get an army of like nieces, nephews, and my daughter, and like I've just spent most of the last 10 years getting horsed after them at everything.
He's just saying nobody's good at Call of Duty.
Do you still get button bashing? Like, can you still win at games by just randomly smashing buttons?
She was just sitting hammering the control, and I was worried she's got to break it. But as long as she was playing computer games, I suppose I passed the torch. But no, I think that again for parents, it's interesting because I think that before the pandemic, for a lot of parents, just having spoken to parents over the course of Checkpoint and what I do, is kind of video games still seen as the unknown, still seen as a child's play, still feeding into the tabloid headings and stuff like that. But then during lockdown, where they were forced to be indoors and see their kids, a lot of parents, credit to them, were taking half an hour of their day to play Fortnite or sit with them, whilst their kids would allow, and see, like any game you're playing online, there are weirdos on the internet, so you do need to be mindful of that. But really encouraging them, really understanding what it is, But as we then move back to normal, it would be a key for parents to keep an eye on kids, because they're maybe less aware of the stuff you're saying about, again, your man does sound like he got lucky, but as adults, it might be easy to identify that, you're not going to work, for example.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And if it's a school holidays,
I've got a friend and they've got a son and he's 18 or 19 now, and, he's not very good at much outside the PlayStation, and he just wants to play PlayStation constantly. And I think that maybe even for developing brains, there might be, like we're saying, you get this sort of gratification, and that's how our reward system's made. Like, you do good things and it comes back, and you should develop habits based on these good things. But sadly, I think for a lot of young men, if the world outside isn't really accepting who they are or whatever, it's very hard to go and get a job, and it's getting worse and worse. Why would, if that's the place where you're getting that sort of gratification, then there might be a danger in setting limits and stuff. Like you're saying, that these technology addictions, like social media, porn, gaming, like, they're all very new. We don't really know what's going on with them. And I think that, like you said, they aren't inherently bad. I don't know if there is much that we do consume that is just bad, like nothing but bad. There's always a sort of good and a bad side, but I think you're right. Like, if hopefully the pandemic, if parents have been sitting down with kids and then realise, oh, wait a minute, this is actually great, but also I need to be aware of how much that they're just disconnecting, But
in terms of my experience growing up with gaming, I remember having the Commodore 64, the Nintendo, the PlayStations and stuff. Usually like a year after everybody else got them, to be fair. But we had them through the years, and like, I remember my dad kind of like hovering about in the background, being a bit like, so what's this then, and what'd you do with that? And you'd be like, you want to go? No. My dad was older when we were growing up by comparison to some other parents and that, but he always had that kind of like, oh, aye, what's that, what you doing here? And, quite like conscientious about what we're doing. We've obviously, been the same with Alex, but throughout the pandemic, I've actually found that we've spent time in, like, so we've got like half a dozen different Minecraft worlds that, we build mountaintop mansions with back caves and then move on to the next world and all sorts of. So it's been a great opportunity to actually like spend time gaming together, like side by side on the split screen, particularly when it comes to Minecraft. I think the other one was Fall Guys, which is just basically like Wipeout, kind of like, the TV show Total. It's kind of like a gaming version of that, and they're like great fun wee short games that cater to short attention span a lot of the time, but at the same time are really fun, really relaxing and quite inclusive.
It's definitely a generational thing.
I definitely find myself now being more like, do you want to sit down and we'll have a go in this or we'll have a go in that, because I'm conscious of like that generational thing before as well. My dad's popping heads round doors and being like, pure, what's this, and almost kind of like treating it with a level of suspicion in some respects, whereas I'm like, no, let's just sit down and play. And I think that's it's become a good common ground for us in that respect.
That's a generational thing, because my dad just didn't like getting beat like 20-0 at FIFA. He did try and sat down and he was like, what the fuck is this thing? And I'd be like, it's alright, we'll turn it on, you'll get it. And he was just like, I don't get it. But our generation seemed to be like the first sort of generation of dads that game with their kids, and like
the average age is like 35 now or something, right? Gamers, and that would reflect the fact that you've maybe been playing through the 90s and whatever.
Absolutely.
I think, it kind of frustrates as somebody who plays a lot of video games and is an advocate, whatever you want to call it. If you talk, just for what we've spoken about so far as examples, if you were to sit and watch films all day at the expense of something else, that would be, a bad idea. Nobody's saying that you should sit and play Minecraft from 8 in the morning to 8 at night. If you do, there are issues you might need to address. Maybe you don't, maybe you're still managing time for anything else. It's not, it's very idiosyncratic, but in terms of that, and I completely get that, the kind of older generations looking over your shoulder a wee bit unsure, and it's that idea of the unknown again. In pre-pandemic, 2018, I think the film industry was worth $41 billion, give or take. It's like £30 billion, right, in 2018, when box office, before there was any compromise there. And in the same year, the video games industry was worth $162 million, so £130 million or something like that. Now, it's not about money, but if you're looking at these industries and thinking, what do they contribute, what do they make, how important are they, how, what's their stature kind of thing, if you're basing it on money, because it's, you know, like it's not all about money for me, but if they always hear about, oh, this film grossed this film grossed that, or this book sold this many copies or whatever, a lot of things are judged on, you know, how much they're consumed by the public. Video games are, you know, head and shoulders above them all.
Yeah.
So how can it be the unknown if it's making all this money, if people are playing all these games? And granted, I know that video games cost more to buy, but you can, obviously, you talk about replayability and everything. You can watch a film once before you need to pay for it again in the cinema. But I just think a lot of people don't know these things. I think that's a little frustrating when I don't think it takes too much for people to learn. But that's when it's great to be in a position where to be able to do things like Checkpoint for myself. Like I consider myself really fortunate to be able to write a book, to be able to write about two things which I'm passionate about: mental health through my own experience, video games through, you know, as a real passion, and then merging the two to talk about how they help me in the sense that how they might help you or yourself or whatever, or someone else. And also, again, people can identify video games as something we hear about all the time, and we're getting much better, like I said earlier, about talking about mental health, but to be able to talk about something, oh, video games are really cool, I know about that. Mental health, I hadn't really thought there was too much a link there, but here's how it's happening.
It's quite interesting as well. One of the points that you made earlier on was that you were playing games that addressed issues like suicide and mental health. And I was instantly taken back to Final Fantasy VII, right? So this was one of the first games I played on a PlayStation 1 a million years ago. I subsequently played it again in recent years, and I've, in the last sort of 6 months, bought the remastered update. And when I was playing the older version again in recent years, it dawned on me for the first time that the entire story is about a guy recovering from PTSD. So there's all this fantasy and magic and, you know, all this, you know, the stuff that comes along with it, and monsters and demons and whatever else. But essentially the story is of a veteran who returns home from war and at various points suffers through like flashbacks and I was like, Jesus Christ, like Final Fantasy VII's a mental health story, and I was like, that's a level to it that maybe I can only appreciate as an adult that I couldn't maybe appreciate as a teenager sort of thing. But there are other games out there. I think the what's the one that's the two mirrors or something? Mirror's Edge or something? Mirror's Edge. And there's other games out there that actually the entire narrative is based on, you know, the people's mental state. So what games was it that you were playing that introduced you to that?
I mean, it's interesting because I've played Final Fantasy VII countless times as well, and you talk about the kind of going through PTSD, identity crisis and stuff like that. When I was specifically about the games which made me kind of start to consider mental health and gaming, is I've always felt that video games are informative as a medium, because unlike cinema or books or more traditional media, video games are interactive. Obviously, it's a kind of three-dimensional thing, and you can read a book, or you can watch a film, or you can watch a documentary, which, you know, is an invaluable way to consume knowledge and information. But with a game, you put you in it. You know, you pick up a control pad and it's you. You don't say Mario died, you say I died. If you leave that control pad down, you turn it on and you leave it, nothing's happening until you put yourself into it. So I always think that it's one of the things which I speak about in Checkpoint in terms of, for consuming information, you can either relate to the character, which in the games, which I'll speak about in a wee second, in which case you then maybe start to understand your own self a bit better, or you can't, but you can appreciate this character's story a bit more. Maybe it's Cloud in Final Fantasy VII. So the first game which I kind of started playing, it was an independent developer called Matt Gilgenbach, was Neverending Nightmares, which is a game about his own OCD. And a lot of people, when they think about OCD, and I certainly did for a number of years when I was younger, it's people that need, you know, say with this desk with all the waters kind of lined up, and he's kind of arguing that it's not necessarily all, but that his OCD manifested with kind of imagery of himself kind of self-harming and stuff like that, and it's really quite graphic, and all these games are qualified to start with the right disclaimers and stuff. And again, whenever I'm speaking about this, I'm not a mental health professional. I have lived experience with suicide, and I like video games and I like writing. If anyone's struggling with any of these kind of things, you should definitely go and seek professional help. Another game is Actual Sunlight, which is a game about a character called Evan Winters, and he's a kind of 95 everyman in Canada, and he really struggles with the kind of mundanities of just day-to-day life. So this one was really good because I think that even though we spoke about the struggles which Cloud has in Final Fantasy, he is, he's a soldier, he's a, okay, it's quite crude graphics at the time, he's a muscly guy with a big huge sword. You've maybe got Lara Croft, you've got Nathan Drake for the Uncharted series, Solid Snake for Metal Gear Solid. You've got all these typical hero figures who are muscular, good looking, they save the world kind of thing. Whereas in actual Sunlight, the character is just this kind of mid-30s guy that's losing his hair, kind of something like myself, and he's just a normal guy, and he's struggling with all this kind of, he's struggling with lasting the full day and work without feeling like shit, or he's struggling, his mate texts him and says, "Do you want to go for a drink on Saturday?" And he says aye, and then he gets to Saturday and he comes up with an excuse not to go. And at the time when I was going through this kind of process of suffering from depression and anxiety without really knowing what was happening, I was playing this game and thinking, oh Jesus Christ, this is exactly, or not exactly, but this is really reflective of what I'm doing. So actual Sunlight, the Never Ending Nightmares, there's a game called Little Red Lie by the same developers as actual Sunlight, which considers somebody with depression, and it shows you the perspective of a sister living with someone with depression, which I think is quite interesting as well, because throughout my own journey, my kind of long-suffering girlfriend has had to put up with me, and I think that one thing about people with depression, I speak from experience, is there's not enough of a conversation about how selfish you can be, because people don't really want to admit that, because you're feeling like shit, and that's absolutely valid. But it's so easy to be consumed by how you're feeling and not really thinking about how your behaviour might be affecting others. So that Little Red Lie is really interesting in that front as well, because it shows the side of someone else watching someone with depression. And my girlfriend Jenny's been absolutely brilliant with me, but there are times when I'm sure I've been really doing on nothing, because it's, you're not meaning it, to be fair, but it's a difficult one. But the indie spectrum is brilliant. I play a lot of games on PC. Steam is full of kind of wee gems. There's a horror game called Layers of Fear by a game developer called Bluebird Team, who today have just announced a collaboration with Konami, and they do a lot of horror games, a lot of rumours whether or not they'll take on Silent Hill again, which would be brilliant because I love Silent Hill. But their first game called Layers of Fear was about this artist who goes out to this kind of this big sprawling house out in the woods kind of thing, horror film kind of cliche fodder. But instead of all these bad things are happening, but he is starting to kind of lose his sense of reality, and it feels like approaching mental health and horror, and normally it's just about jump scares and the fact that we should be terrified of poor mental health. This is a bit more nuanced. It's a bit more putting you inside the kind of the character's head. So it tends to be away from mainstream games. It tends to be more the kind of indie games, which I have found most kind of, I don't know, stuff I can relate with and comfort in mental health. I wrote an article for The Guardian a couple of years ago about Grand Theft Auto 5 mental health, which I thought was really interesting. Over the last few years, I've started playing a bit more in the role-play scene, where you go in and you've got GTA on its own, where it's just a kind of crime simulator where you commit all these nefarious acts, as most people will be familiar with. And then the role-play scene in PC is a kind of different spectrum altogether, where you're encouraged to use the Los Santos map and treat it a bit more like reality. So you get a job, you buy a car, daft things like you stop at red lights.
I watched a video the other week there on YouTube of a guy who was running for mayor.
Aye, there you go. It sounds tedious, right? It sounds boring. It sounds like if you want to play GTA. I think Limmy's had a good crack at it as well, which is, he's obviously quite funny when he does it. But GTA is known for the kind of overblown violence and drugs and everything else, and that's great fun. It's anyone who chooses that over the roleplay scene is absolutely fine. But similar to what you're saying about Minecraft or Animal Crossing or your man that swapped Call of Duty, to go back to Minecraft, like playing this game, this lovely kind of sprawling map, and doing it a bit more like real life is quite soothing as well. And I inadvertently, just completely randomly, discovered this group of players who use Grand Theft Auto as a kind of self-help-ish group. And as I say, I wrote about this for The Guardian. It was people that would just wander about, no cars or anything, just walk and use their mics and just chat about.
So there's like virtual walking talks.
Basically, and using
Grand Theft Auto.
Mount Chiliad, which is the big mountain, go on a hike and just chatting about this. Lassie had a mother who was an alcoholic, somebody else, his uncle's an alcoholic, and he'd been knocked down and killed outside the pub one day. And I spoke to them and I said, as long as I can anonymise your names, could I write about these experiences kind of thing. And I thought that was really valuable, because here's a game which is known for all these really bad things. I mean, to be fair, it wears it all on its sleeve. But people have got these assumptions with Grand Theft Auto, and then here was this really wholesome thing which exists in the same world. So it depends. I mean, I've tended to find myself that the indie games have been more helpful at addressing the teams head on, because ultimately it's a bit of a gamble for the big studios to do a game solely about depression, because they're there to make the mega millions. But I don't know. It's good to see that you can find these pockets in games like Grand Theft Auto.
This was something that I touched on in the wee sort of short episode we did recently, because I have discovered DayZ. Right now, I'm not playing it at the moment. I probably will at some point, but I'm just engrossed. And again, it's this open world survivalist sort of zombie apocalypse type thing. But on the servers for the the online side of it, there's just this myriad of stuff going on that is so out with that sort of zombie apocalypse genre that it just kind of like drew me in. So a lot of guys spend times building like really elaborate bases. There's other guys who focus their energy on helping other players as they spawn in and stuff like that. There was one guy that was running a taxi service between cities. This is like a fictional sort of Eastern European country that has multiple sort of villages and towns, and he was running taxi services. There was another guy who was running. He was a drug dealer. Growing weed to then sell it to buy supplies
within a game.
Within the game, right. So there's like a real like senses of like multiple communities.
It's really similar to the DayZ one. I don't really play DayZ, but I did know a strong roleplay community, and it's the same with this Grand Theft Auto in terms of taxi services. You can become a tailor and make clays for the mafia and the gang and things like that, and it's just even it's bizarre. Like
Red Dead Online, there's like they have essentially like biker gangs, but because it's in Red Dead Redemption, it's horses. So they've got like squads of like 30, 40, 50 guys, and they have like initiations like a biker gang. They have all these things, and like you can hire them. You can, if you want to go, this guy's or this group out here have messed with me, you can go and hire these dudes, and they will go and like fuck this other gang up for you.
That's cool.
There was two guys in DayZ who you could call them in and they would build your base for you. So like one guy just phoned in the builders.
I'm a joiner.
This pure just weird stuff that is not what I would readily associate with that particular game or that particular genre. But I love how people have taken these ideas and started to make them their own, like as you say with these role plays. And I really enjoy like watching these narratives because these communities, these people are in and out regularly, and they're their own characters in a lot of senses. So, but I think they must get something really good for that as well. That when, like you were saying with Call of Duty, like when they log in, there's 30 mates in their biker gang, or there's 10 mates in their base, or whatever it is, and they're working together towards common goals. And I think that in itself is like the type of thing that we talk about doing in real life to make ourselves feel better, like service and all these other things.
I think like if you're just living a mundane life and you're looking forward to going home and kicking about with your mates in a game, there's nothing wrong with that. Like as long as you've got something to look forward to, and finding some sort of joy. Like, and if you get that through a game, why should it be any less valid than if you go and walking a Sunday up a hill, what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, just
or dive into a book to, you spend hours reading a book to go to this other place which it transports you to. It's that's the stigmas around video games. I mean, they're maybe not as bad as they've been. Like gaming just seems to be, again, we spoke about the numbers earlier, it's massive now. It still frustrates that it persists more than anything. A lot of the time it is, in my opinion, to sell newspapers or to get clicks on websites.
We're starting to see a change though, but I think there's like there's BAFTAs for gaming and stuff like that. Now there is starting to become more mainstream recognition of the art form in that sense.
When you're getting the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra doing like the Tomb Raider suite, where it's all the music from Tomb Raider, only it's through the strings and Skyrim and things like that as well.
And cool. I never realised
it's
that.
Kind of branching into the arts, for want of a better term, beyond gaming, which is good to see.
So it's kind of educational for people, because if they like that, then they might seek it out and start listening to like classical music if they've been into a game. Do you know about? I just looked it up on browser. Eliza. You ever heard about Eliza?
Eliza. I'm not sure.
So Eliza was like basically a I'm not going to bring it up here, sort of almost teased you there. It was a computer program that was developed in the 70s, and it was like basically the world's first computerized therapist.
Aye.
And it did nothing but repeat back to you what you said, but just paraphrased. It was programmed to paraphrase.
Oh, right, aye.
They did this test where, like within a university, it probably been Stanford, they seem to be doing did all the experimental stuff, and when they took it away, people were like, oh no, I want it back. They really get a lot of benefit through just being able to talk to a computer program. And I suppose, like, do you see gaming actually being something like that, where you could maybe even log on and speak to some sort of like digital therapist? Or
I mean, the with the technology and the way that it's going, I mean, I think the sky's the limit, for want of a better term. Like that example I gave about Grand Theft Auto and people logging in, I got the sense that they knew each other from the game, but not necessarily knew each other in person. And that's kind of like that in terms of this anonymous. Okay, that's a very kind of crude example in terms of the time of just a digital interface repeating the words back to you. But meeting up with random players doesn't need to necessarily be your mates. And if you feel more comfortable sharing whatever's going on in your head, I mean, I know you hear this, it's good to talk and you should try and talk if you can. It's become a cliche for all the right reasons. It is certainly through my own experience, being able to chat about the stuff in my head helped me. The first conversation with my girlfriend helped me immensely, and then being able to keep that going. If that's with a computer program, if it's with random people online, it doesn't really matter as long as you make that first step. There's a game called EVE Online, if you've heard of that, a kind of MMO space game where people live. It's kind of, the whole game is based around the role play. There's like a whole economy that exists there. There's a lot of trading. People meet up at the conventions and get married and stuff like that. And there's a group of players there called Broadcast for Reps, and I spoke to them within Checkpoint. And basically, there to kind of summarise their story, there was a player called John Bellicose who sadly took his own life, and he was a really prolific player. And his mother got involved because she saw like the good that the game brought him, and she wanted to firstly let the community know, but now she's really involved, and she goes to Iceland. CCP, the developers based there, they've got a thing they do in Las Vegas every year, these kind of conventions, and she goes and she talks to the players and tries to raise a bit of mental health awareness. And this group, Broadcast for Reps, now exists in the game. And they're not qualified therapists, but they're just there for a kind of, an ear to bend or a shoulder to lean on, and it's basically in the game. They're like kind of in-game therapists, and they're very upfront about the fact that they don't have mental health qualifications. But if you want to just speak to somebody, and it's kind of similar to what you're saying, it's like, yeah, so that computer program, if it's only repeating the words back, has no, it's not any built-in knowledge.
But also, exactly, I think what was really effective about it was that it had no built-in ego.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Because one of the big things is that as much as therapists are trained in that, they're humans and they've got their own ideas on how you should live your life. And it was very much like what people liked about this was that it had no opinion. It could have no opinion. It was basically a teletext thing that you typed into, and it would be like, well, I'm not feeling great today, and it would be like, okay, well, why are you not feeling great today? And you'd be like, well, I had an argument with my wife last night. Well, tell me about that argument. It just basically asked you a question based on what you said. Very formulaic, but people get so much benefit out that they asked for it back when it took away because it was an experiment. And there's something to that. And I think like,
it's really interesting. I mean, there's always that wary side of it. We might go full iRobot and take over the world or something.
Where's the information going?
Exactly.
That was last week's episode.
But even in the virtual reality side of things as well, it's kind of flattered to deceive in the last 10 years. I mean, the advent of Oculus and stuff in the last decade, we thought we were getting what we were promised in the 90s, and it's good. There's maybe not enough of it there. The tech's maybe a little bit more expensive, although it is getting cheaper now. But again, in Checkpoint, I spoke to a guy called Skip Rizzo, who's over in the UCLA. I forget the name of the specific department off the top of my head, but basically they've been working with virtual reality technology since the 90s with people that have suffered from PTSD, predominantly soldiers, but also like sexual PTSD and other kind of forms that it presents. But they've been using virtual reality to use a soldier's example, take soldiers back to the moment where they're maybe driving down a street in Fallujah, Iraq or whatever, and they recreate a roadside bombing.
This is about safely recreating the
in a
moments of
safe
trauma.
space, But it's really interesting. He was saying that not just about the kind of sights and sounds, so they've got the big headphones on, they've got the headset on as well. He said, but smells. He said, so if there was like a big pile of rubbish on the side of the road, they would feed that into the room.
Like a
so
fourth dimension.
Exactly, aye. It sounds a bit like a kind of Disney ride or whatever, but obviously it's very serious, but it sounds like entertainment more than it does, but they've been taking that technology and really growing it. So for the kind of the kind of helping people tangibly and physically, not just about playing a game and sharing experiences or relating, to be able to actually use it as therapy, I think it's really interesting as well.
I think the virtual reality thing as well is also becoming quite prominent in how they, like, is it the training surgeons and stuff like that, where in the past we would be reliant on people who had maybe donated their body to science on their death and stuff like that, whereas now there's the actual virtual reality that they can use in a lot of senses to train or to at least practice in very keyhole surgery and these type of things. So the technology is expanding in scope in a sort of big way.
You've seen even, Thomas Cook, I think it was, or one of the travel agents. I think they had one in Glasgow, certainly in London, where say you wanted to go to New York, and they had a booth in the back where you could put on a headset and walk down Fifth Avenue, look about and see what you think of it before you sign up.
Try before you buy.
Exactly.
Do you like this hotel room?
Then you go there and it's like damp and stuff. Is that something like this? But I mean, I think that that's kind of moving away from gaming. It's more specifically virtual reality, but the scope for it is just, and you see it with festivals as well. I think it was Coachella a few years ago. They had the virtual experience. Exactly. Well, the holographic stuff. But even I was more thinking they let you wander about the campsite with the virtual reality before you went, kind of thing. And if you couldn't make it, you could do it for the house and you could watch and stuff. And I think the scope is just...
BT have got the thing on where you can put the VR headset on and sit and watch the game as if you're in the stadium.
Last year, that would have been brilliant.
It's fit in one of the Marvel movies where Tony Stark's like revisiting his last interaction with his dad, and he talks about how this virtual reality that he's developed sort of cured his depression, and
it's very similar to the...
I think this is where we're going with it, really, especially the PTSD stuff. I mean, I've read a bit about that myself, and it must be incredibly powerful for people to be able to go back and revisit these moments, as much as people might think that that's counter. Really, the way out of these things is exposure, because it's an anxiety that comes from an experience, and exposing yourself to that experience is what you kind of need to do to recover from it. Running away from it is the problem. So that's kind of like that. I think that's amazing that they're using this technology to really sort of think about how can we try and help people. And what about, did you meet much stigma when you were writing the book? Did you meet many people that were kind of anti-gaming? And
not too much. I think more kind of general scepticism from predominantly parents, actually. That's why I kind of make a point of whenever I'm doing these things to mention the pandemic and how, credit to a lot of parents who have taken that time to understand. Because I don't think it needs much. I think it's just to sit down, like you mentioned, split screen and stuff like that, just to understand. In the same way you wouldn't want your kids to be reading, I don't know, books that had damaging themes. I'm not handing away
Mein Kampf for anything.
Exactly,
like that,
you know what I mean? Exactly. I didn't face too much stigma in writing the book itself. That the hardest part for me was probably... I've always found a bit of catharsis about writing about games of mental health and sharing my own experience. And again, I find myself, and I think it's a really fortunate position where I'm able to. A lot of people don't have the means or aren't confident enough to pick up something and write something. So I'm really fortunate for that. But there's a difference between writing a 1,500 word article for PC Gamer or for The Guardian or something than there is in writing a book. So the level of catharsis, I expected to go in and just get this all on the page, and I found that kind of pouring over particularly kind of narrative elements where I'm putting me in it to be quite difficult. So it was probably harder in a personal sense than it was about a kind of broader stigma. I spoke to a lot of people who are very passionate about what they do, and you guys will find this in terms of what you do in the mic. It's one of the best things about being able to interview people is speaking to people who are passionate makes you passionate, even if you don't know that much about it.
Definitely.
And that was brilliant. And in terms of the feedback which I've had, there's a kind of modest print release in terms of it being an independent publisher and stuff like that. But I'm delighted with the feedback from the book's managed to end up with some charities and stuff for people that could potentially really need it or relate to it, whatever. If somebody reads it and they don't agree with it, then that's obviously completely fine. I would rather that at least they've given it a shot. And that's the thing about stigmas as well. I mean, if you believe that about video games, I'm not here I'd like to try and change people's minds, but I'm not here to preach, that this genuinely happened to me. I found solace in this. You might not use video games that way at all. You might. If you read the book, at least you've tried to educate, or if you read any literature that's out there, whatever, at least you've tried. And if you still feel that point of view, then that's your prerogative as well.
So one of the things I want to touch on, and I'm not sure, I know obviously in the book you speak to a lot of people in the industry, and I know there was a spectrum from, as you say, the independent gamers, the independent game companies to more sort of mainstream high-end guys. One of the things that has come up in relation to the industry and mental health is the pressure that sort of game creators themselves are under. Is that something that you had experienced when you were speaking to people in the industry? Because, I think it sounds daft to relate it to this, but I've been watching Mythic Quest in recent months.
I've not got around to it yet, but
it's brilliant.
That's your man face. Fella
with Sunny Bit Eyes. The show's excellent, and it's a sitcom basically set in a game developer's office sort of thing, and it has the testers, the creatives, and the voice actors, and how they all kind of just are dysfunctional and nonsensical. But one of the things that comes up time and time again in that, and I've read about elsewhere, is the pressure that sort of game creators are under to meet deadlines, because it is such a big industry. There's so much money to be made that when they release titles, and we've seen the downside it with like Cyberpunk this year, where the game went too early, and this game that people had anticipated for years pretty much fell over on itself kind of overnight. So like, what kind of how are people managing their mental health when they're creating games?
I mean, it's you could write a thesis on crunch in the video game industry. So I crunch when Cyberpunk's a really good example in terms of a contemporaneous example, getting to a point where you've said you're going to release the game at this point, you've maybe delayed it and it needs to be finished, and you've got game developers in pulling ridiculous shifts. I do spend a bit of time talking about crunch in the book. It's a lot of video game companies now are trying to position themselves, saying we don't condone crunch, we don't. They're trying to come up with all sorts of initiatives where it doesn't happen. There are quite a lot of reports on the specialist press side of things that suggest that it still is happening. In terms of people who are making games, ultimately it's still work, and I think that I saw this a little bit on the media side when I used to write in video games. People say, it's brilliant, you must just sit about playing video games all day. And when I worked full-time at PC Gamer, I was predominantly in charge of the UK side of news, and you're trying to get 5, 6, 7 news stories out a day. In your 9 to 5, you're not playing any games. You maybe pick up a game if they've spoken about a very specific bug, which has happened in a new game. So you'll fire up the game to see if you can replicate it, just so you can talk about it with a bit of knowledge. Or maybe you're talking about, maybe it's more of a kind of colourful piece and it's about a specific game mod and you want to go on and make sure that it works and do whatever. But the rest of the time you're writing, even when you're reviewing a game, you maybe have you get review copy on a Monday, the embargo lifts on the Thursday, and the game lasts 30 hours. You need to try and fit in work and also playing that game and also writing a 1,000-word review, which is its own form of crunch. So when people see behind the velvet rope, they kind of see that it's maybe not all just sitting down and playing games all day. Don't get me wrong, there are worse jobs. As I used to be a plumber, my job was literally shit at times, having my hand up to here and choke toilets. I loved writing about computer games. I love writing about football as well. But it's still a job, and it's still you're still getting paid to do it. And you need to think about the kind of welfare and mental health of workers. When it comes to video games, there's so much money involved in that. Now, I've never developed a video game, but Cyberpunk is the best example. First teased in whatever it was, 2013 or something like that. But they're under immense pressure to, and also I feel for the developers as well, because they've I mean, if it's been hyped since 2013, whatever it was in the early 2010s, they've poured blood, sweat and tears into it, and then it releases at a state which they're not happy with, and the world goes mental. And criticisms for the most part, were fair. It was the game was launched in a state which it shouldn't have been launched. I feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
Naturally, you've got the vitriol which falls on Twitter, which is uncondonable. People on social media are a bit unhinged at times, unfortunately. But
just a bit.
Yeah,
People are just unhinged at times, unfortunately.
exactly.
Not just in social media, but we're starting to see changes, like real changes come in the way, like the distribution of like sort of money on the internet, and I think that, I don't know, I might be wrong in this, but it kind of feels that in gaming that there's a lot of money for the gamer. I'm not talking about like for the developers, obviously. There's a whole like £1 billion economy around that, but for the gamer, it seems to be that it's like you can either make tons of money, and be in the top 10 in the world at COD, and you're a millionaire and whatever, and then there's millions, if not billions, of people underneath that just play the games. And what I'm referring to is things like I don't know if you've seen like Andrew Yang, the guy that ran for president in America against Trump, and he's got a whole thing about the data dividend, where your activity on Facebook creates some money for Facebook, and really you should have access to some of that money because it's you and your advertising and your eyes. And do you think that's something that we might see in gaming? I know that in COD, like, you can play to earn COD points, which you can then spend on guns and within the game, but do you ever see it moving towards people making low-level money off of stuff like say you play COD for like fucking 30 hours and they go, well, we'll give you like 50 quid for that, like, because...
It'd be interesting. I think, it would really set a precedent if one developer did it. Like say Activision do it with COD, then you maybe see that, I don't know, Rockstar feel obliged to do something similar in GTA. It's... What interests me, I couldn't definitively say aye or no to that particular question, but just how gaming is changing. So games as a service, for example, they existed 10 years ago, but they weren't really a thing, whereas now they really are. Fortnite has really made that massive across the board, across all age ranges. Cosmetics, loot boxes have obviously been hugely controversial in the last 5, 6, 7 years maybe, where you're seeing legislation being brought in, you're seeing governments censoring parts of specific games. And again, loot boxes are, I still feel, and again, I don't work full time in the video games industry now, I'm only on a freelance basis, but I still feel that there's a level of confusion about the murkier areas of loot boxes, whether it is gambling, whether it should be illegal, whether kids should have access to it. Naturally, if there's money involved, as a parent now, I think that no, kids shouldn't have access to it. But again, to remove them entirely, is that fair on the players who, shark cards in GTA, for example, don't necessarily give you a competitive edge, but they give you access to a better car, so you can maybe zip about a bit quicker. As somebody who plays GTA Online avidly, there are games, Fortnite's probably the biggest example, but GTA Online has got so much cosmetic stuff, which doesn't really change the game too much. You've got outfits, you've got guns, which can give you an advantage. You've got cars, but it's like I don't know, how would you put it? It's like a virtual shop window, in the sense that they released the Avenger, is it called in game? I've drawn a blank. It's basically the Batmobile in game. They've called it something else to avoid trademark copyright. But you could be walking down the equivalent of Sunset Boulevard in Los Santos, the pseudo interpretation LA, and the Batmobile zips by you, and you think, "Fuck's sake, I want that."
Yep.
And there are a few games out there which do that in a real world setting. So Los Santos does look like LA in certain parts, or you could see an oppressor flying motorbikes, which have got the missiles attached to it, and they're the bane of every player when you're running on foot trying to find a car and they're getting missiles shot down on you. But you can see it and you think, that's what I want. Can I afford that by grinding in game? Well, I could have had a shark card, and that's what it becomes. I understand people's angst towards it. I've kind of went off on a mad tangent about whether gamers would get money for doing that. I think it's a good idea as somebody who plays games, obviously. I just don't know that it needs to make sense for the developer, and they're making so much money just now off of loot boxes, off of again, using GTA example, shark cards, where people are putting money in. I think that, to be fair to Grand Theft Auto Online, I've got no affiliation with Rockstar. I just really enjoy the game. I think that the updates which they've provided over the last, when GTA Online launched in PS3 in 2013, 2015 on PC and PS4, and it's still going. And so the free updates, like the After Hours one a couple of years ago, where they brought in DJs and you could run nightclubs. The Cayo Perico was a new island which launched in December last year. They're all free if you're already on the base game,
Yep.
which I think's good. Whether or not people decide to pay money for shark cards is a whole other argument. But they're making so much money by people putting money in. It would be interesting to see if they started to reciprocate
It feels like we're at the other end of the spectrum where they're making so much money that's where they're at. I mean, I get the arguments when it comes to like the loot boxes, because that was one of the other points I wanted to just touch on before we started to sort of wrap up, was that this is something that's become massive in the industry in the last 10 years. I always approached it quite innocently. Like I get that in most games, most of what you get for them is largely cosmetic, and that's the bit about it that I don't understand, because my missus is daft on Call of Duty. She plays with our guys, the work colleagues and stuff like that. And it used to be, as she started to get into that years ago, I think it was like Modern Warfare 3, and she was just hooked. I would occasionally let wages there come in, I'd buy her like Call of Duty points or whatever, and be like, there you go, I know you're enjoying this, like here, there's whatever, 20 quid's worth of Call of Duty points going. And I was just assuming that she was getting stuff that would be advantageous in the game, sort of thing. And when I realised that it wasn't, I was like, hold on a minute, like, what is this? She's like, oh, it's just like camo and shit, and then calling cards, and I was like, so hold on, the money that I've spent on this has not in any way, shape or form made you better at Call of Duty. And she was like, no. And I was like, well, why the fuck does anybody do this?
Like, vest, it might make it worse because
somebody can see you. Like, I get with like FIFA, it's different because those players will benefit you. You can convert and sell.
Like that's
and
the roulette into it. Really, is that
Yeah.
you buy these FIFA packs and you might get nothing, but you might get something really incredible, and that's where they're starting to think: is this
people
gambling?
that would defend that would argue that the packs or cards is equivocal to football stickers in the playground 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or if it is just cosmetic. And again, going back to,
that's a good point. That's a very good point on the football cards, because you were opening that football card, and if you got something like a good shiny, you'd be like, yes,
exactly.
If you got a pile of shit, you'd be like into the bin or try to trade it. So it is very, very similar.
And if you're looking at like using games as escapism, I'm not arguing either way. Like, I understand the arguments for both sides. It's a controversial topic, and I can see. Again, I'm now looking at myself as a gamer, as somebody who writes about them, and as a parent, and all three have got, they all overlap.
Yeah.
But the cosmetic side of things, if we're talking about games as this space that you want to escape to, that you want to do something different, if it's role play, that you want on a Friday night, come in and put the reward on hold and play Call of Duty, and you're paying for a t-shirt, it depends how serious you're taking that. You pay for a t-shirt in real life to go to dancing, you pay for a t-shirt to look a wee bit better in game. I know that it can become a bit, obsessive, but it is so murky. It is such a grey area where I can see the pros and cons.
No, definitely. I mean, it's probably quite interesting as well that it's been so successful in terms of these loot boxes that games like Fortnite, for example, are essentially free to download in the first instance. So that's been a big change from my time as a gamer, is that the game is almost handed to you so that you then later spend money rather than sort of charging you for the game.
Purchases rather than paying for something.
It's so quick to have spent. So say a game costs on average these days 50 quid. You could be charged 50 quid for a game, and you've paid 50 quid for a game, and it's like, cool, there's that 50 quid, maybe I need to take it easy until payday, whatever. But if you're getting it free, are you taking a note of, a cosmetic at 2 quid, 3 quid, 4 quid? If you went, Christ, I spent 100 quid now, that game's cost me. Do you know what I mean? And that's how they get you, and I understand that. But it's
even how easy they made it. That was the thing, wasn't it? And I know people that had kids that ran up 300, 400, 500 quid on FIFA just because their parents' card was registered to their PlayStation, and it was just click. And I remember somebody telling me that they'd actually confronted their way as you would, and the boy was like, I didn't even realise I was doing it. And when the dad went in, this was working back years, when the dad went in and looked at it, he was like, it's not clear that he's spending money, and it's not very clear at all now, whereas now it's like, do you really want to do this,
security codes
and obviously the apps like the PlayStation app, and parents will get a notification that money's getting spent and all that. They've really worked hard to sort of bring that to a point where people are sort of happy with the balance, I think. That's
it. Balance is the key. I think it's the key for everything, and everything we spoke about over the last hour. it's with loot boxes, with your time in front of games, and making sure that you're doing your best to strike the balance, and those around you are doing the same as well, you know.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's over the hour, mate, and it's been an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
But what's next for you? Like, what have you got planned for yourself personally?
I don't know.
Other than writing Big Angie's biography before Christmas.
In terms of the last year, as I say, Checkpoint was written. Apart from that, we prelude at the start. The whole thing was written before the pandemic, and the pandemic has changed even over the course of the pandemic. Like we said at the top of the program, my perception of everybody should play games, to be mindful of your habits and continue to enjoy games in a healthy balance. But I do keep going back to, and this is also to do with being a parent myself and my kids getting a bit older, is the conversations which I've had through Checkpoint have been about parents still a little bit unsure. And the games which I talk about in Checkpoint, which help me, most of them are 18 plus. You know, they talk about, I spoke about the guy who talks about OCD and self-harm. It's all in Never Ending Nightmares. It's a kind of monochromatic, quite stylish, illustrative kind of style, but it's still quite graphic. And if you're not 18, you shouldn't really play it. Again, with all the disclaimers at the start of the game. Actual Sunlight talks about suicide and depression. There's a game called Depression Quest, which I didn't mention before. It's a developer called Zoe Quinn. It's a kind of narrative game where you've got like a kind of multiple choice of what to do, but it basically rules out the options for you. So say, for example, do you want to go for a drink on Friday night? You want to say yeah, but the game doesn't let you. Lets you see that it's an option, but it scrolls out and it's supposed to kind of reflect what you're feeling in your head. But all these games are they're for adults basically. And I think that anyone who is old enough should play them and see what you think. But over the last year, I've had a lot of parents talking about it. So I feel that I've probably got more to say now about some of the more universal games like, Fortnite, like Minecraft. Sea of Thieves is a big one from Rare, the game developer. And I think that there's maybe more to be said. I'm not quite sure how and when or exactly what I'd be saying, but I don't know. Maybe.
Cool.
To kind of focus a bit more on a more universal crowd and kind of open it up to stories about other people, maybe not just specifically about myself, but
sounds interesting.
Absolutely.
Welcome back if that comes to fruition.
Aye, absolutely. Yeah.
Welcome back anytime, actually, mate. It's been nice to talk to you.
Thank you so much for
having
having me.
Thanks very much for coming in, mate.
Always a pleasure to chat games and mental health and everything else.
Man.